There comes a time in every man's life when the noise fades, the crowd disappears, and silence becomes his only companion. It's in that quiet, where no one sees, no one claps, and no one calls your name, that God begins his greatest work. The world calls it loneliness, but heaven calls it preparation. A man standing alone often feels forgotten, but heaven knows he's been chosen. Before David ever faced Goliath, he stood in the fields, tending sheep, fighting lions and bears, talking only to God. Before Moses ever stood before Pharaoh, he walked the desert in obscurity for 40 years. That's the pattern of God. Before he reveals a man publicly, he refines him privately. The solitude before the storm isn't punishment, it's process. It's God pulling you away so he can speak without the noise of the world interrupting. In that quiet, the man wrestles with confusion. Why me? Why this silence? Why now? But as days turn to nights and nights to mornings, confusion slowly becomes clarity. What once felt like abandonment starts to feel like an invitation, a call to trust deeper, to believe harder, and to rest in the unseen hand of God. It's in those hidden seasons that faith is born. Because when you have no one to lean on but God, you finally realize he's all you ever needed. He hides you not to humiliate you but to heal you. He silences the noise around you so you can recognize his whisper within you. So if you feel unseen right now, remember this: you're not forgotten, you're being formed. God hides his warriors before he sends them to battle. The cave that feels like isolation might just be the training ground for your destiny. And when the storm finally comes, you'll realize the solitude before it was never wasted. It was the place where God turned your weakness into strength, your fear into faith, and your silence into song. If you're walking through a silent season, hit subscribe, because this message is for every warrior in the making. There are moments when life feels like it's falling apart. Relationships fade, doors close, people you thought would stay suddenly walk away. It hurts. It confuses. It breaks you. But what if this breaking isn't destruction? It's divine direction. What if God is pulling you apart not to ruin you, but to ready you? Before God elevates a man, he separates him. He removes the noise, the familiar faces, the comfort zones, not because he wants you lonely but because he wants you dependent. Loneliness becomes God's classroom. Every tear, every night of silence, every unanswered question, all of it becomes part of the training. Because when you have no one else to turn to, you finally turn completely to him. Look at Joseph, loved deeply by God, yet thrown into a pit by his own brothers. From the pit to the prison and then to the palace, the pattern never changed: separation before elevation. Joseph's isolation was not rejection, it was redirection. God was not removing people to hurt him. He was removing people who couldn't handle the man Joseph was becoming. That's how God works. He subtracts before he multiplies. The pain of separation is often his greatest act of protection. The friends who left, the opportunities that closed, the people who misunderstood you, they were never meant to go where God is taking you. Some chapters end not because you failed, but because God finished teaching through them. Think of a seed. Before it blooms, it must be buried. Darkness surrounds it, pressure crushes it, and the soil hides it from sight. But beneath the surface, something sacred is happening. Roots are forming. Life is stretching. Growth is beginning. The burial isn't the end, it's the beginning of transformation. So, when God pulls you apart, when he removes, rearranges, and redefines, don't panic. You're not being punished, you're being positioned. The silence is his signal. The distance is his design. The pain is proof that he's preparing something greater than you imagined. God's isolation is his form of insulation, keeping you safe from what could destroy you too soon. Sometimes he separates you to save you. Because what he's building in you requires focus, fire, and faith, and not everyone around you can handle that process. It's raw, it's real, and yes, it hurts. But one day you'll look back and realize, that season of being pulled apart was the foundation of everything you became. The loneliness didn't break you, it built you. So don't curse the separation. Celebrate it. You're not losing people, you're finding purpose. If this season feels lonely, don't quit. Subscribe and let God remind you you're being set apart, not left behind. The greatest battles are never fought on visible fields, they're fought within the walls of the soul. It's the silent war between who you were and who God is calling you to become. Fear whispers that you're not enough. Doubt says you'll never change. Pride tells you to take control while God gently says, surrender. That's the tension, the inner battle of silence versus self. When God isolates a man, he doesn't just separate him from the world. He begins separating him from himself, from ego, from comfort, from illusion. Because before you can conquer anything outside you, you must first face what's inside you. In solitude, the applause stops. The affirmations fade. There's no one to impress, no stage to perform on, no crowd to validate you. And it's in that quiet that God begins to expose what applause used to hide. The insecurities, the fears, the pride that was buried beneath success, they all rise to the surface. Not so God can shame you, but so he can shape you. Even Jesus faced this. Before his ministry began, the Spirit led him into the wilderness, alone. For 40 days he wrestled with hunger, temptation, and identity. The enemy whispered, "If you are the Son of God," but Jesus answered with truth anchored not in emotion but in the Word. The wilderness didn't weaken him, it strengthened him. Because isolation has a purpose. It exposes lies so that truth can take root. Imagine a soldier training in darkness before his first battle. He learns to fight blindfolded, to trust his instincts, to hear beyond noise. That's what God does in solitude. He sharpens your spirit until faith becomes your vision. He trains you to move not by what you see but by what you know in him. The silence can be heavy. You'll question yourself. You'll wonder if God still hears you. You'll feel unseen and unfinished. But that's the sacred space where transformation happens. Because in silence you're not alone, you're under construction. At first, the man resists, he fights back, questions God, demands answers. But over time the struggle turns into surrender. The heart that once demanded control begins to release it. The soul that once fought the silence begins to find peace in it. That's when breakthrough comes, not in noise, not in motion, but in stillness. The silence isn't empty, it's full. Full of lessons. Full of whispers. Full of God's unseen hands molding your spirit for what's next. The wilderness is not a punishment, it's a proving ground. So if you're in that quiet war right now, if your thoughts are loud but God seems silent, remember this: the silence doesn't mean absence, it means alignment. He's teaching you to hear him beyond the noise, to trust without sight, and to stand without applause. The inner battle is brutal but it's holy. Because once you conquer yourself, no storm, no rejection, no fear can ever defeat you again. If you're fighting that unseen battle within, hit subscribe. The next message might be the word that gives you peace. After the long night of silence, something begins to shift. The chaos that once filled his mind begins to quiet, and in that quiet, a whisper emerges, gentle yet unmistakable. It's not the thunder of God's voice, but the softness of his presence. The man realizes that what felt like divine distance was actually divine depth. God hadn't left him. He'd been working in the silence all along. After silence comes clarity. It's as if the fog begins to lift and suddenly, what was confusing starts to make sense. The tears, the loneliness, the questions, all of it begins to align into something purposeful. The man starts to see that silence wasn't punishment, it was preparation. God wasn't ignoring him, he was anchoring him. It's the moment of divine revelation, that sacred encounter when the soul stops striving and starts listening. In the stillness, peace replaces confusion. The noise of the world fades, and only the steady heartbeat of heaven remains. He hears it not with his ears but with his spirit. Like a sunrise after a long night of isolation, light begins to break through the darkness. It's not sudden or loud, it's soft, gradual, holy. Each ray of light carries a message: I was here all along. He begins to see how every unanswered prayer, every lonely night, and every silent season was shaping him to recognize God not just in miracles, but in moments. The stillness becomes sacred. The emptiness becomes full. The silence becomes the stage where revelation speaks. It's in that moment that the man realizes something powerful. In silence you don't lose God, you find him more clearly. You start to see that faith was never about hearing him constantly, but trusting him completely. The encounter changes everything. The same place that once felt like a wilderness now feels like a sanctuary. The same silence that once hurt now heals. The same solitude that once broke him now builds him. He understands now, God wasn't trying to take him out of the noise, he was trying to bring him deeper into his presence. And as peace settles in, a quiet strength rises. He doesn't need answers anymore, he has assurance. He doesn't crave crowds anymore, he's found communion. He doesn't beg for signs, he's learned to rest in whispers. This is where transformation meets revelation, not in the spotlight but in the stillness. Because when God finally speaks through silence, his whisper echoes louder than the world ever could. If you've ever felt like God was silent, subscribe. The silence may be his way of speaking. There comes a moment when everything begins to make sense. The loneliness, the waiting, the tears, the silence. What once felt like breaking now feels like building. The man who once cried out, "God, where are you?" now whispers, "God, thank you for being here all along." This is the making of a warrior. Transformation doesn't happen in comfort, it happens in the cave. Loneliness becomes the forge where strength is born. Weakness transforms into wisdom, and pain becomes the hammer that shapes purpose. Every sleepless night, every unanswered prayer, every moment of stillness, all of it was a divine workshop where God was crafting something extraordinary within an ordinary man. David walked out of the fields not with fear but with faith. He didn't have the armor of Saul, but he had the anointing of God. What he carried wasn't visible strength but quiet power. That's what divine preparation does. It strips you of the world's definition of strength and fills you with heaven's definition: surrender. True strength isn't found in resistance, it's found in release. The man finally understands that surrendering to God doesn't make him weak, it makes him unstoppable. Because the moment you stop fighting God's process, you start flowing with His purpose. The making of a warrior isn't loud. It's not built on applause or recognition. It's built in hidden places, in late-night prayers and quiet obedience and unseen acts of faith. God's process doesn't produce pride, it produces power. Not the kind that shouts but the kind that stands. Picture it: armor forged in silence, sword sharpened through faith. Every strike of pain, every test of patience, every season of stillness, it all adds edge, depth, and resilience. The cave that once felt like confinement now feels like calling. The isolation that once hurt now holds honor. Because warriors aren't born in crowds, they're built in caves. When the moment finally comes for him to step out, he doesn't walk out desperate for approval, he walks out confident in his assignment. The world sees a man ready for battle, heaven sees a son ready for purpose. His strength is not in the sword he carries, but in the silence that shaped him. He realizes that every no from God was a hidden not yet. Every delay was a design. Every setback was a setup. Because God's process may be painful, but it's never pointless. And when he finally faces his Goliath, whatever giant stands before him, he no longer trembles. Because he knows what the cave taught him, that the same God who was with him in silence will be with him in battle. The man who once doubted now declares with quiet confidence, "I am ready." Not because of his power but because of his preparation. Not because of his might but because of his mercy. This is what the making of a warrior looks like: forged in fire, refined in faith, and revealed in God's time. If this spoke to your spirit, subscribe, because your cave may just be the birthplace of your calling. In the end, he looks back and realizes, what once felt like isolation was actually intimacy. The quiet that once felt unbearable has now become sacred. Every lonely night, every unanswered prayer, every moment he thought God was silent was actually God speaking in a language deeper than words. He understands now, God was never distant. He was disciplining in love. Every delay had purpose. Every closed door was divine protection. Every heartbreak was heaven's redirection. What looked like being left behind was actually being led deeper. He entered solitude as a broken man, uncertain, weary, and questioning. But he emerges a warrior, grounded, peaceful, and ready. Not because the pain disappeared but because it no longer defines him. He's no longer asking, "Why me?" but rather, "What now, Lord?" His heart beats differently now, steady, surrendered, strong. There's a calmness in his spirit that only comes from walking with God in the dark. There's a confidence that no man can give and no failure can take away. Because he now knows, being alone with God was never a season of abandonment, it was the season of becoming. He finally sees that solitude wasn't a setback, it was a setup. God wasn't breaking him to end him, he was breaking him to build him. And as he takes his first steps into the next chapter, he carries the lesson of the cave in his soul, that those who walk with God in silence will one day speak with power in the open. He's no longer just surviving, he's becoming. If you're in your season of becoming, subscribe now, your story is just beginning.